Hello. If you have found yourself in a situation where you must stay home for the majority of or all of your time, perhaps dealing with isolation, then this video is for you. For years, I have spent the majority of my time at home and mostly isolated due to chronic illness and inaccessibility as a wheelchair user. And in this time, I have found some ways to lift my spirits and continue my personal growth. Finding your small joys. When I was younger and going through a tough time, something that kept me hanging on was this fantasy of peace. I would imagine myself as an adult, alone, and playing oldies music on the radio, watching the sunrise through a window, having a cup of hot coffee. And this is what peace looked like to me. And now I'm an adult, and I can give myself that fantasy. I can hold my hot mug of coffee and take a deep breath in and a deep breath out and really appreciate that moment. Staying in one place and in periods of or total isolation can be really psychologically taxing. So you deserve to find your moments of joy and peace and to give them to yourself. When I was recovering from surgery and I couldn't really get out of bed at all, the thing that brought me joy was musical theater. I would either watch musicals on TV, or if I couldn't watch TV, then I would listen to cast albums and imagine what the musical looks like in my head, essentially directing musicals inside of my head, kind of like a musical audiobook. And that was the thing that would make me happy. What's something that you can do at home that would make you happy? Let me know in the comments, and maybe you guys can bounce ideas off each other. When it comes to daily activities, if structured routines is how you want to go, you can make a schedule for yourself. Set up times for your meals, for learning something new, maybe a new language or a skill, or trying new things like a new recipe or watching a new movie or a new book, or working on creative things like writing or painting. If you love your unstructured time, have at it. But if you come across the feeling of, I'm bored, I don't know what to do, maybe what might help you is to, at some point, sit down and write down those things that make you happy, that bring you joy, the things that you'd like to try. Put them on little pieces of paper, and then just have them in a bowl or a hat or whatever you want. And when you have those feelings of restlessness, then you can just pick something out of the bowl and try that. Or if you need to rest. Try not to be so hard on yourself for needing to. If you gotta, you gotta. Self-discovery. Self-discovery is a huge opportunity to be gained from alone time. And I think that more people should attune themselves to that. It's a time to figure out what are the things we do that are performative versus innately us. How do you behave when you're alone? What actions do you do solely because people are watching you? Do you like these things about yourself? Is there anything about yourself that you would like to work on? This is a great time to take all those personality quizzes and see what kind of insight they can offer. There's things like the Myers-Briggs, the color code, the Enneagram, finding your love language, getting your birth chart done. So many. I'll go ahead and leave some links in the description for you. Who am I? Is often an existential question that a lot of people dread. But I love exploring myself and learning about myself and finding the places where I would like to grow, learning the language that will allow me to communicate myself better. It's one of my favorite benefits of all my time isolated and at home. Self-therapy. Whether or not you are seeing a therapist, and remember that there are some who do video calls and phone calls and texting for their sessions, something that I always practice is some form of self-therapy. By self-therapy, I basically mean keeping an eye on my mental health and doing whatever is in my power to keep my brain healthy. But I'll go into more detail about what self-therapy means for me. I started doing this because I dealt with mental health issues as a teen and as a young adult, and I didn't really have access to a professional therapist. My only real options at the time were to research my symptoms, essentially self-diagnose, and find healthy ways to cope with whatever was available to me. And I know the idea of self-diagnosis and self-work may sound alarming to some people, but when it's that or nothing, you do what you have to do to survive. 2 separate times in my life, I dealt with severe mental illness. By severe, I mean I was in the depths of mental illness and it was extremely harmful to myself. And I had no idea for the longest time that I was even dealing with mental illness at all. I just thought my intrusive thoughts were logical and factual. And they went unquestioned for the longest time too. And as I said, it ultimately put me in very dangerous situations. When I started to question it, which is essentially what I mean when I say self-therapy, I learned as much as I could, and I put words to what I was experiencing and did whatever it was in my power to just try and help myself. At the time when I was dealing with the very deep lows of my mental illnesses and doing my self-therapy and self-work, a lot of it was instinctive. But with the amount of information we now have available through the internet, I can also recommend seeking out coping mechanisms and healing tools through that avenue. Without having the names for it at the time, I was practicing mirror work, exposure therapy, correcting intrusive thoughts as though another being were saying them, discovering my triggers and setting boundaries, etc. There is, of course, a limit to this because there will be some cases where seeing a professional is the best option, whether it be for medicinal reasons or for some other kind of treatment. However, trying to be attuned to ourselves, question our thoughts, question our mental health, discovering the parts of ourselves that need healing or accommodation so that we can navigate the world more safely and to grow is definitely something rewarding that we can try to do on our own. Grieving the life you once had. For many of us, being homebound is a transition, and it can be a really difficult one. It's often not a choice. And so it feels forceful, out of our control. And that's one of the first triggers. It sometimes means we have to find new ways to work, or that we cannot work at all. It means less socialization, less getting to hug people we love, getting to hang out with them and do activities with them. For me, that was one of the most painful things, particularly right now. Not knowing when I'll be able to hug my friends again is something that has literally brought me to tears.
I was originally trying to keep this video a bit broad so it might be used for a variety of different circumstances where one might become homebound. But in this next part, I will be touching on some grieving topics where the difference between pandemic lockdown and being homebound due to chronic illness and disability become a little difficult to tell apart. A lot of it is actually very similar. But I do want to take this moment to say that in these shared experiences, there can be so much trauma on top of trauma, and While I am referencing the current pandemic, I would like to offer my deepest condolences to those who have lost their loved ones, whether or not it was to COVID-19. If you have lost anyone you love at all, for any reason, my heart is with you, and I hope you have the time and space you need to grieve these losses.
There are things to be angry about, like oppressive systems of power, failing leadership, hoarding of resources, continued racist violence, and disregard for human life. There are anxieties, like contagion anxiety and income anxiety, and the anticipation of the long-term emotional and psychological wounds this will create. The PTSD, the fear. All of our current circumstances have such an emotional toll. It's very common for them to trigger anxiety and depression, among many other mental illnesses. It can cause us to feel hopeless and irritable, be hypersensitive to microaggressions or perceived microaggressions. Grief is ever present and can just sort of spike or burst in those moments where you feel the impacts of change. You will ache in nostalgia for the past. You will mourn the things you imagined for your future. You'll feel moments of longing and anger and sadness. Whatever it is that you feel, allow yourself to feel it. Do not try to numb it. Just go through it. And remember that it's not the end. We just have to find new ways of doing things. In the future, I recommend looking at disabled folks in that regard. Disabled people have always led the way in finding new ways to adapt. Hashtag the future is accessible. We now have the ability to live stream with professors and teachers, work from home with our computers, meet up with our friends through video chat. The possibilities are endless. Work and education, community, and joy can continue even if you cannot leave your house. I've been having to spend most of my time at home for years now because I'm chronically ill. I've already been through the trapped feelings, the exhaustion of looking at the same four walls every day. For me, I've experienced the anger, the anxiety, the sorrow. And to this day, grief comes in moments and waves. For anyone, being stuck at home can cause psychological distress, restlessness, irritability, depression, anxiety. I can feel that way not just about my house, but my body. Sometimes I become all too aware of my chronic pain. If I'm not distracted by something, and then all I have is my pain, it's like this horrifyingly loud, intolerable ringing in my head. And just like you might wish to just erupt like a rocket out of your house, I can sometimes feel that way about my human suit. All that to say, my grief is multi-layered. I've had to grieve not just my ability to go out, be among people that I like, do the jobs that I used to do, attend college courses, etc., and the ability to do those things on a daily basis. But I've had to grieve my body's specific loss of abilities that put me in this position in the first place. And I had to grieve the loss of privilege. I'm making this video during a pandemic when most of us are staying home. But when things eventually open back up, I'll still be here. For the most part. And others are home 24/7. So I just hope that the tools that were being used by disabled people for accessibility, now popularized by the pandemic, hopefully are here to stay, and that we continue to pursue equitable accessibility for all of us. If you have arrived at the end of this video, it was a long one, I know. Thank you for sticking around. I hope that you leave here reminded to be kind to yourself and be kind to others. If you have more than you need, spread it onto others who don't. Keep an eye out for those who are vulnerable, and this is inclusive of elderly folks, chronically ill folks, people with low income, or people who have lost their jobs. And also remember that there are so many people struggling right now. So the least that we can try to do is have an understanding that we are all experiencing a collective trauma experience. So many of us are in survival mode or exhibiting our trauma responses. So try not to take small outbursts personally and hold ourselves accountable. We shouldn't be having outbursts at people, taking things out on other people, projecting whatever we're experiencing onto other people. But also remember to set clear boundaries and keep yourself safe. Please share things you find rewarding about staying at home in the comments. Like I said, I'm sure so many people are looking for things to uplift them in this time, and I will see you eventually. Take care and stay safe.